Well, is localisation the answer for economies and for our economy? Our government seems to think so. Certainly the Minister of Trade and Industry, Ibrahim Patel, seems to think so. And Bernstein at the Centre for Development and Enterprise disagrees. She says many stakeholders in the economy are endorsing local production as essential for economic growth in South Africa. She joins us now. Anne Bernstein, good evening to you. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Government claims localisation will create jobs. It will create jobs by protecting our manufacturers. You believe it will actually damage our economy. Why do you believe that?
Well, I think the benefits of localization are being overstated, and the disadvantages, the costs of localization are being underestimated. So think of it this way, Stephen. If you have to force government agencies to buy from South African firms, it must mean that the local product is more expensive or less effective or doesn't do exactly what you want it to do if you'd rather buy from an imported product. So firstly, it will be inferior. Secondly, it will raise costs in our economy. If you're forced to buy from local producers, there are probably not very many. We have a highly concentrated economy. We're trying to make it much more open. You're going to favor incumbent firms. They will not have incentives to compete with the world's best products, and that will make them less efficient. So more expensive, less efficient. And then, as Professor Jagdish Bhagwati of Columbia University likes to say, we will encourage directly unproductive activity. We will encourage firms to lobby government to make sure they're a designated product, a designated firm, and this is not productive for the economy. So for a whole lot of reasons, we think this is the wrong approach, and it will not, in fact, help make us a more dynamic economy, able to compete and export into world markets and be part of global value chains.
So, I mean, I hear the argument, but the argument would go like this, and cement's a good example because the National Treasury has said essentially all government projects must use South African-made cement, and we're quite a big cement manufacturer, but I think the Western Cape has said they would like an opt-out, they want to use foreign cement. But wouldn't the argument go, if cement is made here by South African people who need jobs, let's keep those jobs in this country rather than buying cement from, I think, Pakistan, which is then employing other people when we've got people here who can do it for us and we can employ them. Their wages will then go back into the economy and stimulate the economy, would go the argument against you.
Well, that's certainly the attractive idea of localization, and it's seductive, but it's not true. What will happen is we will force the Western Cape and other provinces to put up the price of their infrastructure project. So you're forced to buy local. There's a reason people aren't buying local, because the product isn't good enough or it's not cheap enough. So there's a cost to buying local. And what we're doing essentially is we're saying the way to create jobs and firms in South Africa is to kind of hold things as they are, keep things as they are. Our companies must survive. We're cutting ourselves off from forcing our companies, giving them incentives to compete with the best in the world. We're cutting ourselves off from the best products in the world, from new innovation. And we're saying this sounds attractive, but actually is going to make this economy more expensive, a harder place in which to do business, and it will end up not creating the jobs and the new firms that we want, especially new black firms. It's going to be incumbent firms that are going to have greater opportunities to produce for the local market.
So, I mean, another good example of this is textiles. In the 1990s, when our economy internationalized after the era of isolation because of apartheid, but also because of the way we joined the World Trade Organization at the time, what that meant was that everybody brought clothes from China. And that meant that our textile industry, particularly in the Western Cape, disappeared, to the point where now our president makes it a news story if he wears a South African-made suit. I mean, that's how big the deindustrialization has been.
Well, you have to ask yourself, what are our priorities? What should be our priorities? I would argue we need to look at economy-wide changes, and this economy needs dramatic changes. So we've got to fix our logistics, the cost of ports and its inefficiency, transport. All of these things are because we're holding on to very inefficient, very expensive state-owned companies. We have to fix our labor markets. There were producers in Newcastle who were competing with Chinese imports. But the trade unions came along and said, no, you're paying much, the wages are too low, you can't do this. So you can't have it always. We're either part of the global economy, in which case we have to be competitive in terms of costs of everything, as well as efficiency if we're going to compete. So look at the clothing sector, for example. We've given them all sorts of protection, and there are some firms that benefit. They tend to be the larger firms, the more sophisticated firms, but the smaller firms, the potential new firms, they don't. And in fact, our clothing production has gone down. So all this protection hasn't helped. So you have to ask yourself, will protection work? At what cost? To whom? So a few companies will benefit in each sector without doubt. But what about consumers? What about the costs to government? What about the non-designated products or the firms that are not connected, not able to get in on the game?
And
so there are a lot of costs here.
And Bernstein, thanks very much indeed. Executive Director at the Centre for Development Enterprise, a historical footnote, the leader of the union which went against those Newcastle factories, later became the Minister for Trade and Industry.